Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I draw onto fabric with crayons. Good old crayons from like when we were kids. I prefer the Crayola brand because I think the vibrancy and the saturation of the colors are gorgeous. Now, this image, after you set it with the iron, and I show that technique in the video, can be laundered. And that's great if you want to use it on a t-shirt or something to that nature. I use it in fabric books, which don't tend to be laundered, but the image does set. Through time and washings, it might fade a little, and you can just refresh it by coloring over it with crayons again, and then resetting it. That's one of my biggest questions that I get asked about these colored images using crayons on fabric. So let me show you how I create it. So here's an example of a crayon drawing of a watermelon on fabric. Now this is great because I can use this as a patch in my slow stitching. I can add it to a fabric book, and I can really personalize the elements. It's not easy to find a particular image all the time. I mean, they make beautiful fabric, but it's nice to have the particular image I want. This is one example. At the end of the video, I'll show you a number of other examples, and I'll show you how I added some extras, some slow stitching, some ribbon and trim to really jazz it up to use in my work. But this is the basic image here. The one we're going to be drawing today is just a little different. I take a little sketch and I make a few sketches and I play it around until I found the image that I want to create on my fabric. So this is the image here. It'll be a slice of a watermelon or a quarter or so, and then an actual watermelon. So to that effect, I went to my crayons, and I prefer Crayola crayons, and I just chose all these beautiful colors. Now, one thing I like to do is sharpen all my crayons. I like to keep a sharpener with them. Sharpening crayons is messy. They're waxy, so there'll be a lot of debris. It breaks into pieces and it sticks everywhere. But the effect of a sharpened crayon and using that sharpened crayon is just tremendous. It makes such a difference between just the crayon out of the box for the most part. There'll be plenty of techniques you can use with a dull crayon as well. So you'll also want to keep a piece of scrap paper handy because sometimes the colors on the crayon that you see versus the colors that it provides when you color it with a background are a little unexpected. And so I just keep this scrap of paper here to see the exact vibrancy of the colors. I chose a bunch of reds and pinks, just whatever I had, and I'll list the ones I specifically wind up using in the show notes, and I'll try and mention them as I use them. I have a couple of browns here, and then I have an assortment of greens and yellows. I like that spectrum, dark greens, light greens, and I always use white and black as well. Now, another thing to note with the scrap paper is sometimes in different batches of crayons, and I've been buying them through the years, these are both considered sea green, and they appear to be very different. So it's good to just sample it in case you want a specific one. There's not a lot of variation when it's colored in, but it certainly does look quite different here. So now let's get started by sketching out our image. I like to use just the large shapes that I see. So I like to sketch what's in the forefront first, and you can decide how large you want it. So this is just a shape like that, really, just a half circle. So I'll kind of sketch it here. I like to have a lot of border of fabric around my piece because then I can embellish it further. So I kind of just sketch my shape here, the half circle, and I can go a little off track. I'm just using a colored pencil, a very light color. Might not show up great on camera, but I don't want it to really affect the colors that I make. And then from here, behind it, I'll create that watermelon. So that's kind of an oval. And then I think on one side it has a little bit of a flat end instead of a perfectly round end. And then I have that little stem. And the stem adds a lot of personality. So it starts up here, and then it comes here, and I can play with that a little more. But I have my basic shape. I can extend it further as well. So now that I have my image here, I'm going to start with a dark green. This one happens to be forest green, but use whatever you have. And very lightly, I want to sketch around the shape. And I'm going to start with the shape in the background this time. So I can move my fabric around. If you want your fabric to be taut, and that makes it easier to sketch on, you have a couple of options. You can put your fabric in an embroidery hoop. You can tape it down to your surface. You can put it in a clipboard. That's pretty easy. I like to have mine on the go so that I can just turn it as I need. And I use a book. This is just a notebook, just to give that a little pressure on the background. So right now I'm just going to sketch out the perimeter. And I'm using very medium pressure, heavy enough to show, but not so dark until I have the shape down. After I have the shape down, I'll just go over it one more time. And I like that. Now I'm going to do the same thing up here on the green of the watermelon in the forefront, but I'm going to keep this one very light. I don't want it to be the same green, but I do want it to have some elements that coordinate it together. I'll go over this green with a brighter green, but I just like to sketch it out. So now from here, I'm going to take my red, and it doesn't matter which red. This one is a salmon, and I just want to create that top line. And I don't want it to be perfectly straight. I want it to kind of look like the watermelon broke off a little bit. And I'm just bringing it up, leaving a little gap on either side. And then very lightly, I'm just going to sketch around to make that rind. Again, just overlapping my strokes and erring on the side far away from the green so I can go back in here and make that a little more even. And again, I'm just pulling the strokes towards me ever so slightly with a very light hand. And this helps for me to bring this all into focus to see what I'm creating. Using that same color salmon, I'm going to take my crayon and use the longer end and just lightly color the top here. Just pulling it out. And I want a really subtle gradient going from darkest to lightest at the bottom. So I'll just fill it in. And when I get to the lower part of that sliced watermelon, I'm just going to fill it in very lightly, and I'll increase the pressure up top. Now this is our first layer. I'm not trying to really press hard, I'm just trying to put down some pigment and really suss out the shapes here. So that's pretty good. It's a good start. Now let's do some work on this full watermelon. I used the forest green for the perimeter of it, and so I'll use this as well for my first layer. I can pull this shape up a little, and I'm going to have the striations coming out from the top of the watermelon. So I turn my paper around, and I'm using that stem where it meets with the watermelon as the top. So I'm just going to create a line that echoes the shape, and it doesn't have to be a solid line. In fact, on a lot of watermelons, they don't go the entire length. Some do. And I'll just choose how many to do here. I've done 2. Maybe I'll extend the top a little here, kind of implying that that's another striation. And maybe 2 more. One here, one there. So now I have just the general lines. I want to start adding some shape to them. So I'll start with this line, this second line, and I'm just going to pull strokes down towards me, just the length of the striation that I created. And I'll do this on all of them. You can either pull the strokes towards you or push them away, but for coloring on fabric, it's easier if you do all the same motion. That way you're not pulling and pushing the fabric. And again, this is a very rough design right now, leaving a little space from the image in the forefront, just to get a little depth here. And again, at the bottom, I'll create a little more. So that's pretty good. It's not perfect, it's not designed yet to be complete, but I want to come back in here and maybe elongate some of these striations. And again, each time I go over it, it adds another layer of intensity. I just don't want it to look like perfect lines. I really like those little striations that happen. It gets thicker and thinner in some spots. And there, we're starting to see it come to life. It's still fairly pale. That's exactly what I want. I want the placement first. So now for the next layer, I'm going to take a brighter color. This is shamrock. A green would be good as well. And I'm just going to extend those striations very gently, but not evenly. See how it zigzags a little? I'll go over the color in certain spots, the existing color that we already put down, and just continue. It's almost like a shadow, but the color is brighter. So I like how this is coming along. I like the depth of the colors here. I'm going to take an olive color, and I just want to go over the areas where those two colors meet. So on each of the striations, wherever they meet, or maybe even occasionally off where they meet, I want to add a little bit of this olive color. It just tones it down, but makes it a little more realistic. It's a little more of a natural color. You can use gray to this effect as well if you don't have olive. So I like the way this is coming. You can even do a very light striation in between if you have a big area that was left. And you're doing it very lightly. It just adds a little more interest, but it doesn't compete with the existing striations, the main ones. So I like that. Now I'm going to take that sea green. It's a light green, and I'm just going to go over the entire piece, just using strokes going up and down, and I'm holding the fabric taut. You can continue to just do strokes in the same direction if you want, but I'm trying to fill in the areas, particularly going over that light olive color we added. But I'm not pushing down hard yet. I want some variation in the watermelon. I don't want it to look perfectly flat. So already it's starting to come to life this way. Now, because I want to create dimension, I want to darken the areas around the perimeter, and the area that's closest to us in the background would probably be the center here. I want that to remain light. So I'll start with my white. This is just a little bit of white crayon that I have left over. And I'm just going to color over and really putting a lot of pressure right on that center area. Kind of a round oval right in the center. Because it's all waxy, it does blend somewhat what's there, but it doesn't completely, it blurs it, but it doesn't completely remove the stripes. So now I want to take a dark color. This is a green. I'm going to start at the bottom here and very gently outline the perimeter again, just going halfway up, and then just pull some of that color out. I'll go to the next area, the next striation, and add some more of that color, trying to keep the striations random. And then finally, I'll go just below that circle where we added color. So I have a little graduation here from the deepest green to the white that we colored in. And I'll do the same thing at the top here. Go around the edges. pull in the striations slightly. And it's coming along. So now I'm going to take that forest green again, and because I want it to be a little more shadowed on the edges, I'm just going to pull in that color very lightly. It'll be a very subtle effect, but I want it to look darker and more intense on the edges to give that depth. So I'm creating that color by just pressing lightly, and then when I get up to the area that's very close to that center, I'm going to just release and have a little less pressure, creating that shape, that round shape. You can go in, you can even go over the center lightly so it blends nicely, but that's coming along. Now I want to take a yellow. You can use a spring green, which is very yellow, or you can use a yellow. I might use both. And I just want to go in there with this brighter color. And again, fill in all those areas around the striations, in between the major striations. Go over the center where we did the white as well. And it just tends to brighten it up. And you can continue to do this as much as you like. I'm going to take that bright yellow and just in a few spots add a little bit of yellow, just like on a real watermelon, that some areas are a little more greener than others. Maybe a little in here too. All right, I'm happy with that for now. Let's move on to the watermelon slice. This will be a fun one. I want to start by taking the green and going over that skin. Now it's not going to be very thick, but I do want it to be noticeable. So I'll just go over that. And because we left a little space between the whole watermelon and the skin, it kind of forms a little space in between. If the space is too much, you can go in with a little bit of the lighter color and just clean it up a little. I don't want them to look like they're running into each other. So now let's start with our gradient. On the bottom, I'm going to take a little bit of this carnation pink and just gently blend the bottom third or so, maybe a little bit, the bottom quarter of the watermelon flesh here. Just very gently going up. Take a little bit of that color and use a little more pressure on the top of that watermelon. And that's looking nice. I'm going to take a little of this violet red. It's a little more intense. And it's a little bit blue as well. And I'll just come up here right at the top of that watermelon piece and then just gently pull it down. Now I like the colors to be blurry, not a solid color block. So I'll just come in here, tighten up areas, and then just put in a few little areas going back and forth. It gives that watermelon texture. I'm going to come in there with the salmon as well and do the same thing. And again, this is just playing around, keeping the strokes back and forth, east to west. And then finally I'll come in there with a red. And I want to use this very lightly. The red is very overpowering. So I'm going to start at the top here and pull that down. I want the bottom to be lighter, but I do want there to be elements of that red. Just little spots in the bottom. Don't want there to be a delineated line where there isn't any red. And now I'm going to take my white again, and I'm just going to burnish on top of this watermelon flesh all around the red. So I like the way that's looking. Let's finish up the rind here. I'm going to take that yellow green, the spring green, and go around the edge. I'm not trying to combine the yellow with the rind or the flesh. Just want it to really hug that green layer. Now I'll go over that original perimeter green with this color. And then I'll take my white. If it's not clean, I'll take the scrap paper and just clean it off. And now I'm going to come in between here just to really whiten the rind. And now we can start finishing this up. You can go over this more to make it more vibrant if you'd like. You can change the colors, making this a little more blue or more pink or more orange. You can vary it that way. I'm going to take this brown and I'm just going to create that stem. So I have the stem here and I like to have it kind of swirly and windy. I think it adds a little personality. And so I have that shape. And now I'm just going to go from the bottom up here. I don't want this to be a solid brown. Just going to fill in a little bit of that with my crayon. And then I'm going to come in here with a sepia. And again, on the bottom only, I'm just going to pull up, just to adding a little bit of shadow every so often on the stem. Then I'm going to take that olive color again and just play inside the stem here to combine the brown with those open areas that we left. If you're happy with the results, you can take some white and just go over it again. This burnishes it down, really fills in the fibers on the fabric. And now we can make, using that sepia, we can make some seeds. You can make them random, you can skip altogether. I like to start and just make a few. I'll make a teardrop shape, but I won't fill it in. Just make a few here. So I have about 4. And now I'll take that brown and I'm only going to fill in one side of the seed. If you make it too dark, it really looks out of place. Especially we have all that beautiful texture behind the seeds that I like. And now with black, I'm just going to go and really shape just one side. And it's really all about creating all these layers. So from here, you can leave it as it is, or you can add a little bit of a cast shadow. I'm going to take a little of that olive green, and I'm just going to create some lines here to indicate a shadow. And the same thing on this side. Just something to ground it. You can go in there with a little of the brown. Just put that down as well. A light version. So now if you're just going to use this to add to a journal, you know you're never going to launder it, you can leave it as is. I don't recommend that, but it's totally fine. There is a lot of wax buildup on the fabric. So what you have to do is set it with an iron. So now to set our work with an iron, I'm putting my pressing mat down, and then I'm taking a paper towel and setting it over my drawing here. I'll take a hot iron, whatever temperature your fabric can handle, and I'm just going to hold it down for about 10 or 20 seconds on each area where I colored it in. So since I didn't color in the entire fabric, I'll just move it around the areas I did color. What you're trying to do is melt off the wax and leave just the pigment behind. And you don't want to use your iron directly because it'll have all the wax on your iron, so I use the paper towel Now when I remove the paper towel, you can see an imprint of my design. What you do is you take another paper towel or reuse that one. I kind of like that image though. And I'll do this again. And you want to do this until there's no more pigment coming off your fabric. And you do that until you're happy with the results. So that's pretty good. There's not really much there. Now it did fade my design a little. I can go back in and add more pigment with my crayon, but I kind of like that the way it is. It gives me a great starting point for some sewing. So this was our end result. And this is how it started the sketch. I like that. I like that transition. Let me show you some variations using the same technique and the same theme. So we have the image we did in class, and I have the sample that I showed you that was just the slice of the watermelon. Again, using a different thickness of muslin. I like using just kind of neutral colored backgrounds. You can use any kind of fabric, but choose wisely what you want. Here's another image where I created kind of a wedge of watermelon. And now I have my pieces that I stitched on. So I first created my image, just like with any of these. And then I added it to some fabric background. I added some lace, some beads, some pearls, just to make it really come to life. And I can put this in my fabric book. I also did a rainbow inspired by the colors of the watermelon, and I made just a little simple patch. I have plenty of blank fabric here so that I can add it to my book and maybe collage over that. And I also did a larger one where I took a watermelon, turned it into an ice pop, again with my crayons. Then I added a bunch of stitches, my little color swatch here, and some buttons. And I really love the border. It mimics those colors of watermelon. So this is how I use my images on fabric. I know some people make beautiful quilts with their custom images as well. And in a video in the future, I'll show you how I take this image and add my little trim and slow stitching. So that's how I create my drawn watermelon onto fabric using Crayola crayons. I think it's a beautiful result. Now, some of you asked, what do you do with this once you have this drawn on fabric as opposed to drawing on paper? Well, I use it in fabric books, and I have a video coming out in the future that will show you the process of taking this image, making it the focal point, and putting it in my work, in my fabric book. I add additional ribbons and trims, some buttons, maybe some beads, and I get a beautiful, unique result. It's hand-stitched, and it is so enjoyable to create. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me today.